Welcome to a place where the forest sleeps and the trees remember. In this quiet corner of the world, time slows to a whisper, and every rustle of leaves carries a story. Tonight, you'll journey through 4 gentle stories woven from the woods, meant not to stir, but to settle. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts soften, and allow these sleepy forest stories to carry you calmly into rest. The cabin beneath the pines. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, thick with pine and silence. Each step along the mossy trail was met with a gentle crunch, softened by years of fallen needles. The air smelled of old bark and cool earth. A traveler walked alone, not lost, just without destination. The path wasn't marked, but it welcomed her, nonetheless curving gently between trees that stood like guardians of a forgotten world, unmoved and eternal. The light was beginning to fade, the kind of blue-gray dimness that comes before twilight. Birds quieted, and the breeze slowed. Still, the traveler wasn't afraid. There was something comforting about the hush that settled here. Then, just beyond a bend in the path, she saw it. A cabin, old but not broken, resting beneath a canopy of tall pines. Its chimney leaned slightly, and ivy climbed the corners. It looked like it had been waiting a very long time. She stepped closer, heart steady, boots sinking slightly into soft moss. The front door was ajar, not enough to invite, but not enough to deny. A whisper of warm air drifted from inside, carrying with it a scent like cedar and smoke. She pushed the door gently. It creaked inward, revealing a single room, dimly lit by the fading daylight through a dusty window. A wooden table sat near the hearth, and beside it a chair with a patchwork blanket draped neatly over one side. Everything was quiet, undisturbed. Dust motes floated slowly in the light, like they, too, had settled into a gentle rhythm here. The air felt thick with calm, like the cabin was holding its breath. The traveler stepped inside, letting the door close softly behind her. The scent of pine filled the space, deep and earthy. The floor creaked beneath her weight, not loudly, just enough to remind her she was part of something older. On a low shelf there were stacked books, their spines faded. A teapot rested on the table, empty but clean, as if it had been used not too long ago. The warmth here didn't come from fire. It came from memory. She walked to the hearth and touched the stones. They were cold, but a thin layer of ash suggested a fire had burned recently. She gathered a few logs, stacked neatly by the door, placed them inside, and lit a match. It caught quickly. The flame curled upward, reaching into the room with a soft orange glow. The shadows danced slowly on the walls. The crackling of the fire was the first sound she'd heard in what felt like hours. With the room glowing gently, she explored further. A small cot in the corner was covered with thick blankets, neatly folded. A journal lay open on the nightstand, the handwriting soft and looping. She didn't read it, just brushed her fingers across the page. Someone had stayed here, someone who knew quiet and solitude well. She pulled the chair closer to the fire, removed her boots, and tucked her legs beneath her comfortably. She sat in silence, letting her body relax into the stillness. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and the cabin creaked once, as if shifting in its sleep. The fire snapped softly. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not to sleep yet, but to listen to the room, to the forest, to her breath. Here, She felt the world slow down, as if time had chosen this place to rest for a while. The night was coming, and she was ready for it. The firelight moved gently across the walls, casting soft shadows that swayed like branches. She opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the quiet glow. There was no clock, no sound of distant roads, and the rhythm of flames, and the low murmur of trees beyond the window. The moment felt stretched, unhurried. She reached into her pack and pulled out a wool blanket, placing it over her legs. The warmth and stillness settled deeper into her chest. A soft breeze passed through a gap in the wooden window frame, bringing in the scent of pine needles and cool soil. It wasn't cold, just fresh, like the forest was breathing. She leaned toward the fire and placed another log gently on the embers. It caught with a quiet hiss, then settled into a slow burn. The flames weren't loud, they whispered. Everything in the room seemed to speak in low tones, careful not to disturb the hush. She noticed a small bundle of dried herbs hanging above the hearth lavender, rosemary, and something else she couldn't name. Their scent was faint, comforting, like something remembered from childhood. There was no need to speak, no need to move quickly. The cabin had its own rhythm, and she had stepped into it, like slipping into a stream and letting it carry her. She felt her shoulders relax more deeply than they had in days. Somewhere outside, an owl called once, low and soft. Its voice floated through the trees and reached the cabin like a lullaby. She smiled, not because it was strange, but because it felt perfectly placed-like. The forest knew she was here and was gently acknowledging her presence. She rested her head against the back of the chair, watching the fire move. The flames rose and fell, weaving light into the wooden walls like a dream. She looked again toward the journal on the nightstand. This time, curiosity called her more gently. She rose, took the book in both hands, and returned to the fire. The pages were filled with soft ink, stroked short entries, a sentence or two each. Most had no dates, just thoughts, quiet ones. The trees hum at night. The rain tastes like the creek. I am still. She closed the book softly and held it in her lap, as if holding a voice. She didn't need to know who wrote the words. The handwriting itself felt kind and hurried, steady, contempt. She placed the journal back on the nightstand and paused for a moment, fingers resting on the cover. The fire behind her warmed her back, and outside, the wind shifted again. It moved through the trees in soft waves, like breath. The forest was alive, but never loud. It moved in quiet patterns, just like the heartbeat of the land. She poured water into a small tin pot and set it near the fire. As it warmed, she added a pinch of dried leaves she carried in her pack. Soon, steam began to rise, curling slowly into the air. The scent of mint and chamomile filled the cabin, mixing with the faint smoke and pine. She poured the tea into a simple clay cup, its surface rough but familiar. With both hands wrapped around it, she sipped slowly, letting warmth meet stillness. The first sip was soft, the second grounding. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the warmth spreading from her chest to her hands to her toes. The forest outside hushed further, as if listening in. She imagined the trees pressing their roots deeper, the moss curling tighter against the earth. The tea, the chair, the fire, each one became part of the forest's rhythm, like instruments in a lullaby meant only for those who knew how to listen. Time softened. Minutes or maybe hours, passed like drifting leaves. The fire dimmed to gentle coals, casting a reddish glow across the floor. She added one more log knot because it was needed, but because the sound soothed her, a gentle crackle answered, rising into the hush. The forest outside remained still. Even the owl was quiet now, and the wind had stilled into a near whisper. The night had fully arrived, slow and complete. She pulled the blanket higher and leaned back once more, eyes half-lidded. She wasn't quite ready for sleep, but rest had begun to settle in her bones. The chair creaked softly beneath her, the same way an old boat might sway gently on a lake. Her breath was slow, her thoughts soft. The cabin, the fire, the trees, they didn't ask for anything. They simply offered space to be quiet, to breathe, to remember what peace feels like. A small breeze stirred again, brushing the cabin walls with a hush like silk. The fire popped once, then settled into a steady flicker. She watched the shadows stretch and shrink, slow and fluid. It felt as if the room were breathing along with her. Outside, the stars had appeared between tree branches, winking gently through the canopy. No bright lights, no moon yet, just the quiet glitter of distant worlds keeping quiet company. She rose and walked to the window, peeking between the wooden slats. The forest floor glowed faintly, touched by starlight. The trees stood tall, unmoving, yet she felt their presence, like ancient friends keeping watch. The air was cooler now. She closed the window part way and listened to the faint sound of crickets in the distance, steady, unchanging. It reminded her of the slow rhythm of waves, only this time beneath the trees. She returned to her chair and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. In the fire's glow, everything felt softer. The corners of the room blurred into shadow, and the walls no longer felt like barriers, more like gentle arms holding her in. The weight of the day had left her shoulders. She wasn't sure when it slipped away, only that it was gone. Here, in the middle of nowhere, in a cabin almost forgotten, she had found what she didn't know she was looking for. A small wooden box on the shelf caught her eye. She stood and opened it carefully. Inside were pebbles, feathers, and a few dried flowers, tokens of quiet walks, moments worth remembering. No labels, no explanations, just simple things gathered with care. She smiled, not out of joy or sadness, but from recognition. She had a box like this once, too, somewhere. She closed the lid slowly and returned it to its place, untouched and understood. She walked slowly across the room and lay on the small cot. The mattress was firm but familiar, the blankets soft from use. As she pulled them around her, the firelight played gently across the ceiling, flickering like distant stars. Her eyes grew heavy. The forest outside had gone still again, its breathing low and deep. She let out a long, quiet sigh, not of weariness, but of release. Sleep was near, like mist settling into the trees. The fire gave a soft crackle, like a whispered good night. Its glow pulsed gently against the walls, the rhythm slow and soothing. She turned onto her side, one arm beneath the pillow, the other resting across the blanket. The cot didn't creak, it simply held her. The air inside the cabin was warm, still touched by the heat of the day and the quiet of the night. Outside, a branch shifted slightly, and pine needles whispered their soft lullaby. Her thoughts drifted without direction, like leaves in a stream. She remembered a childhood morning fog, the scent of earth after rain, the hush of snowfall through trees. Nothing urgent, nothing sharp, just moments. Her breath matched the pace of the flickering fire, deep and slow. She wasn't worried about where she was or where she'd go next. This night was not a stop on the way to something else. It was the destination itself. In the corner, a small wooden figure sat on the shelf, a carved owl, simple and weathered. Its shape was smooth from time and care, its features barely defined, but peaceful. She watched it for a moment, imagining someone long ago placing it there with gentle hands, maybe as a guardian, maybe as a friend. It faced the room, quiet and calm, as if it too had listened to countless nights just like this one, and would listen to many more. A log in the fire shifted, sending a gentle spark upward. The orange glow caught the inside of the cabin in a warm wave before softening again. The trees outside remained still, rooted in silence. She imagined their roots deep below, tangled together like old stories, holding the forest steady through time. She let that image rest in her mind, the trees watching over the cabin watching over her, all of it wrapped in quiet trust. She didn't remember closing her eyes. It simply happened, like dusk turning to night. Her breath was deep now, her hands still, her thoughts faded to murmurs. The fire burned low, content. The wind no longer stirred. The forest, the cabin, the bed all held her gently, as if they knew their part in this moment of rest. Somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, she smiled once, barely. Then she drifted quietly into dreams. The fire softened to a warm glow, its final embers pulsing quietly in the hearth. Shadows no longer danced. They settled, long and low, across the wooden floor. The room felt even more still, as though it too had fallen asleep. Outside, clouds passed slowly over the stars, and the breeze barely touched the treetops. In the hush, everything seemed to exhale. There was nothing to fix, nothing to chase. Only rest and time to feel it. She dreamed of a path through tall grass, with the sound of water nearby. Her feet moved slowly, bare and clean, the earth soft beneath them. In the dream, she carried no bag, no weight, only a sense of knowing she was welcome. The trees above didn't speak, but she felt their presence. The breeze there was kind, wrapping around her shoulders like a familiar shawl. In this dream, she didn't search for peace, she simply walked inside it. A distant owl called again, muffled by distance and sleep. The forest had taken on its deepest silence now, the kind that arrives only in the heart of night. Inside the cabin, not a single sound broke the stillness. Even the coals had quieted, glowing gently like lanterns in a fog. Her breathing was steady and soft, each rise and fall barely moving the blanket. Her dream deepened, and with it the weight of the day disappeared. The cabin held the silence as gently as it held her. No voices, no footsteps, only the quiet creak of wood adjusting to the cold. The journal on the nightstand remained closed, the carved owl watching over the room. Everything inside and outside the walls had found its place. The night continued without fanfare, steady and complete. Even time, it seemed, was resting now, no ticking, no passing, just a slow and endless pause. Far beyond the trees, the stars began to shift again. Somewhere, dawn stirred softly, still far from reach. But here, in this moment, night remained whole. The cabin, though small and forgotten by maps, was a world unto itself, a place untouched by noise, free from demand. Just a chair, a cot, a fire, and a traveler asleep beneath a blanket. It was enough, more than enough, and so the forest watched over her, patient and still. Outside, the trees stood like statues beneath the starlit sky. Not a single branch moved. The wind had gone elsewhere, leaving the forest in complete rest. Beneath the blanket, her hand relaxed, fingers open in sleep. She didn't dream in pictures any more, only in feelings. Softness, warmth, the quiet comfort of knowing nothing was expected of her. The cabin had become part of her breath, and she had become part of its silence. The carved owl remained still on its shelf, catching the last flickers of firelight with its rounded back. It had watched over many travelers before her and would watch over many more. But tonight, its gaze was gentle, almost grateful. The embers continued to dim, leaving behind the faintest red glow like coals tucked into a winter hearth. In the corners of the room, the dark folded in gently, not to hide, but to hold. The forest, too, held its breath. No animal stirred, no distant howl or rustle in the leaves. Even the creek, somewhere far off, seemed to slow its rhythm, quieting its voice for the sake of sleep. The world beyond the trees had forgotten this place, but the traveler had found it, or maybe it had found her. Either way, it didn't matter. She was here, she was warm, and that was all the forest had ever wanted to offer. Somewhere between the fire's last breath and the first blue blush of dawn, the cabin became a dream itself. The edges of the walls blurred into shadow. The floor beneath the cot no longer creaked. Even the journal, filled with forgotten hands, rested without waiting. In sleep, her body softened, and the stories she carried faded like mist. Her mind floated gently, untethered, drifting deeper into the woods of rest. Above the treetops, the stars began their slow retreat, slipping behind the morning haze, but the cabin remained cloaked in night. Here, time moved differently. The fire's warmth lingered long after the flame had vanished. The walls remembered. The trees kept their quiet watch, and the traveler, wrapped in wool and pine-scented peace, slept on. The forest had given her this night as a gift, a perfect, quiet yes to her presence. The cabin seemed smaller now, cozy as if the darkness had drawn it in close around her, tucking the walls like a blanket. Outside, dew began to form on the pine needles, catching the first hints of morning light. But inside, the air remained warm and hushed. The cot cradled her, the blankets heavy in the best way. She shifted once in her sleep, then settled again, her breath slow, steady, a rhythm the forest had long since memorized. A soft creak from the old roof beams echoed once, low and rounded like a yawn. It didn't wake her, simply became part of the lullaby of the place. Everything had slowed to near stillness. Even thought had drifted into rest. The journal, the owl, the small bundle of herbs above the hearth-hole remained in their quiet places. The fire was just ash now, faintly glowing, like the cabin's heart still pulsing gently through the night. If the forest had a voice, it would have hummed just then something low and deep, the sound of earth turning beneath roots. But no sound came. Only the breath of still air and the whisper of the past folding itself into the present. She was no longer just a visitor in this place. She had become part of it like a stone tucked in moss, or a story woven into the grain of the wood. The forest didn't keep her, it welcomed her. The night, though nearly over, held no urgency. There was no need to rise, no footsteps outside, no duties to meet. The world beyond the trees would wait. Inside the cabin, the final hour of night stretched itself wide, making room for one more moment of peace. Her face was turned slightly toward the window, where starlight had faded, leaving only the soft grey of morning's approach. Still, her eyes remained closed, undisturbed. A bird called once tentative, like it, too, was unsure if the night had ended. Its song was brief and soft, then silence again. The trees stood in perfect stillness, their branches heavy with dew and dreams. Inside, the traveler breathed quietly, untouched by the waking world. She had found something rare, a place where time didn't press forward and sleep didn't need to be earned. It simply arrived and stayed, like an old friend. The light beyond the trees grew softer. Not brighter like dawn, was being careful not to wake the forest too quickly. A second bird joined the first, their quiet song blending with the hush of leaves. Inside, her breathing remained slow. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher. The weight of the outside world hadn't touched this place. She remained nestled in the pocket of peace the cabin had opened just for her. The coals in the hearth had cooled, but the warmth lingered in the walls and floorboards. It was as if the fire's memory was enough to keep the room comfortable. Dust caught in a sliver of morning light, now slipping through a crack in the window. It danced gently in the stillness, as if even the smallest movements had learned the rhythm of rest. The scent of pine hung in the air, steady and grounding like a lullaby for the senses. The journal on the nightstand remained closed, though its presence continued to hum softly in the space. It didn't need to be read again, it had already done its part. Like the owl on the shelf and the feathers in the box, it simply was. Each object in the cabin held a story, not loud or dramatic, but steady and sure. Together, they created a space that asked for nothing but presence. And presence she had given fully. Beyond the walls, the forest began to stir, but gently like a child waking from a good dream. The wind returned in small sighs, brushing across the roof and sliding through the trees. But inside, she remained still. Time would move again, eventually, but not yet. The quiet hadn't finished its work. Her rest had not run out, and so, with a deep breath, she stayed tucked beneath the blankets, suspended in that perfect, fleeting stillness. The forest, the cabin, and the woman inside were no longer separate. They had blended, slowly and wordlessly, over the course of the night. Now they breathed together. The stillness was not empty, it was full of presence, of peace. In this small wooden room under the tall pines, the world had paused, just long enough for her to remember something essential, that rest was not a break from life, it was part of it. A light breeze passed through the cracks in the window, brushing against the edge of a blanket. It carried the faintest scent of damp bark and cool morning air. She stirred only slightly, still held in sleep's embrace. The cabin didn't urge her to wake. It offered stillness without expectation, warmth without demand. The world outside was beginning to turn, but in here, time continued to stretch, unbroken, like moss across stone. Birdsong returned slowly, one quiet call at a time. Each note landed gently in the trees, echoing softly through the branches. But still, nothing rushed. The forest seemed to know that waking should happen the way sleep comes naturally, kindly. A squirrel moved across the roof, tiny paws scratching wood, then vanished into the quiet. Even its motion felt measured, part of the forest's slow rhythm. Everything belonged to the moment. The sunlight finally reached the far wall of the cabin, golden and warm. It lit the bookshelf, the wooden owl, and the dried herbs above the hearth. Shadows shifted just slightly, stretching themselves into new shapes. On the cot, she turned gently, her brow relaxed, her breathing unchanged. She was still asleep, but closer now to the edge of dreaming. The warmth of the light did not pull her awake, only welcomed her when she was ready. A memory rose within her dream, not sharp, but comforting. A forest path, a hand holding hers, laughter in the trees. It wasn't exact or detailed, just the shape of something safe. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. The cot creaked softly beneath her, and a pinnacone dropped somewhere outside, landing with a soft thud. The day was arriving quietly, with no footsteps, no announcements. Just light, breath, and the murmur of trees. Inside the cabin, everything remained where it had. Bin books, blankets, ash in the hearth. But something had changed subtly. The silence felt fuller now, no longer the stillness of sleep, but the pause before a gentle beginning. She shifted under the covers and slowly blinked open her eyes. The forest greeted her not with noise, but with a presence, a feeling that she had been seen, kept, and deeply, peaceably rested. She remained still, eyes half open, letting the moment stretch. There was no need to move. The morning light painted soft gold on the wooden beams above her. Outside, the forest breathed its quiet rhythm, and inside, so did she. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the blanket, not out of need, just comfort. Waking here felt different. It didn't pull her forward. It let her arrive gently, like mist lifting off a quiet lake. She sat up slowly, the blanket sliding down her arms. The cool air touched her skin, but it didn't feel cold, only clean, like the first breath after a good dream. The chair beside the fire was just where she left it. The journal remained closed, its secrets respectfully quiet. She placed her feet on the floor, feeling the texture of old wood beneath her socks. Each movement was small, soft, part of a morning written in stillness. She walked to the window and looked out. The trees stood tall and unbothered, their trunks dappled with light. Birds flitted between branches, their wings moving like pages, turning in a quiet book. A single ray of sunlight passed through the window, catching in her hair, on her face. She let it warm her. There was no rush, no destination. Only this place, this hour, this morning held in the open hands of the forest. She placed a few twigs and barked into the hearth, striking a match. The flame caught slowly, wrapping the wood in its soft glow. The fire didn't roar, returned like a memory, calm and steady. She watched it flicker and crackle, felt its warmth reach out. The kettle waited patiently beside the coals. She filled it, set it down, and listened to the faint hiss of heat returning. Everything moved in gentle turns, never hurrying. Steam rose, curling through the air in smooth spirals. She poured a cup and held it close, letting the warmth settle into her hands. Outside, a squirrel darted across the path, then vanished into the brush. She smiled softly, eyes still heavy with rest. This was a morning made not for doing, but for being. She took a slow sip. The tea was gentle, slightly sweet. Just enough. Like everything in this place, it asked for nothing, only presence. She took her tea to the chair beside the fire, wrapped herself in the blanket, and sat once more. The warmth from the cup matched the heat of the flames. She breathed deeply, letting her gaze fall on the slow dance of firelight. No schedule waited. No voices called. The day had begun, but it did not pull her forward. It waited with her, honored her quiet. Outside, the forest shifted into morning. Inside, she stayed still, content to simply be. The fire crackled gently, a soft reminder of presence. Shadows moved along the floor, stretching out like a yawn. She sipped her tea and let her thoughts come slowly if they came at all. Some mornings didn't need thoughts. Only breath, only warmth. The trees outside didn't wonder what came next. They stood silent and alive, asking nothing of her. And she, like them, had learned the art of simply standing still. The journal rested nearby. She reached for it with a steady hand, turned to a blank page, and stared at it for a moment. Then she wrote just a few lines. Not a summary, not a poem, just the truth as it felt. I slept. I stayed. The forest held me. She closed the cover gently, placed it back on the nightstand, and exhaled slowly. Some stories weren't meant to be written in full. Some only needed to be lived once, deeply. The morning light had fully entered the cabin now, painting the walls with golden hues. The blanket around her shoulders felt lighter, though she hadn't moved. The world outside was waking, but inside her, everything was still resting. She didn't need to leave yet. The door remained closed, and the forest didn't rush her. The pines, the fire, the silent soul had become part of her, and she, in turn, had become part of them. She stood and walked to the shelf, fingers brushing the small wooden owl. She didn't take it only, paused a moment beside it. A quiet thank you, unspoken. She opened the small wooden box once more, looked at the pebbles, the feathers, the pressed flowers. She added one smooth stone of her own, taken from her coat pocket, a gift in return, a promise to remember the hush this place had taught her. Then she gently closed the lid. She folded the blanket, placed it at the foot of the cot, and tidied the room with care, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. The kettle was emptied, the fire was left safe and glowing. Every object returned to its place. As she stood at the cabin door, she paused, one hand resting on the frame. She listened, not for a sound, but for a feeling. And in that moment, she felt it clearly. The forest saying goodbye, softly. She stepped outside. The path was still there, dappled with light through the trees. Birds fluttered from branch to branch. Pine needles crunched gently under her boots. The cabin behind her no longer looked old. It looked eternal, like it would always be waiting. She didn't turn back often, just once. A glance, a smile, the kind you offer an old friend when words are unnecessary. Then she walked forward, quiet and calm. The trees welcomed her return to the path. The breeze moved again, curling around her shoulders, cool and clean. She felt lighter now, as if sleep had washed her soul as well as her body. The rhythm of her footsteps matched the heartbeat of the land. She didn't know where the path led next, and she didn't need to. The forest didn't guide her with signs. It guided her with trust. Every step forward felt like peace continuing. As the cabin disappeared behind her, it didn't feel like leaving something behind. It felt like carrying something with her, a softness in the chest, a slowing of thought, a memory of warmth not held in mind, but in the breath. The forest ahead was quiet, sunlit, and open. She didn't rush. Each footfall was a promise to stay grounded. Each breath reminded her she was here, she had rested, and she could return, always. And so she walked quiet, steady, and full of stillness. The pines swayed gently above, birdsong trailing in and out of hearing. The forest didn't close behind her. It remained open, like a story still being told. And as the path turned out of sight, the cabin beneath the pines remained small, quiet, warm, waiting not for her or anyone, just waiting. A place where sleep came easy and peace came naturally. A place to return to in dreams. The bridge over Stillwater Creek. The trail curved gently through a grove of tall trees, their branches high and open, letting soft light pool on the forest floor. Each footstep landed on packed earth, quiet and steady. Birds chirped from somewhere overhead, distant but familiar. The breeze was mild, carrying the scent of water and moss. Just ahead, past the next turn, the traveler spotted an old wooden bridge, resting quietly over a narrow, glistening creek. The bridge looked worn, but not broken. Its wood was grey with age, smooth from years of rain, sun, and forgotten footsteps. Vines crept up one side, and a few leaves clung to the railing. The water below moved slowly, almost still, reflecting the trees above with perfect clarity. The traveler paused at the edge of the bridge, resting a hand on the worn rail. The wood was cool to the touch, as if it had just woken from a long sleep. A dragonfly hovered near the creek's edge, its wings catching the light like glass. The traveler watched it for a moment, then took a slow step onto the bridge. The boards creaked gently underfoot, not out of protest, but out of memory. The sound blended with the murmur of the creek and the rustling, leaves soft, layered, peaceful. It felt like stepping into a moment that had been waiting, untouched by time, wrapped in stillness. In the middle of the bridge, the traveler stopped. The view stretched wide in both directions upstream. The creek disappeared into ferns and shadow. Downstream, it wandered towards sunlight and mist. A bench, barely visible under ivy, sat on the far side of the bridge. It looked forgotten, but dry. The kind of place that didn't call out, but welcomed gently. The traveler moved toward it, each step slower than the last. Sitting on the bench, they placed their pack beside them and leaned back. The wood was uneven, but comforting. From here, the world seemed to slow further. The water made no rush. The air held no weight. The trees swayed slightly above, moving like deep breaths. With eyes half closed, the traveler listened not for anything in particular, just the sound of a place at peace with itself. The bridge had stories, and now so did they. A gentle breeze brushed through the trees, rustling leaves in soft conversation. The creek below reflected the sky, pale and cloud-dappled, as if it, too, was quietly watching. The traveler let their eyes trace the water's surface, following the ripple of a leaf drifting slowly downstream. It wasn't going anywhere fast, just moving, content to follow the flow. The bench creaked slightly as they shifted, settling deeper into stillness. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaked once, then went silent. The sound echoed faintly off the water and vanished into the trees. The traveler smiled softly. It had been a long time since they sat without expectation. No need to be anywhere. No signal, no words, just the company of a bridge, a creek, and a patch of sunlight warming the tops of their boots. They leaned back again, letting the hush of the place wrap around them like a blanket. Their thoughts began to slow, then soften, like pages being turned gently by the wind. Memories rose not sharply, but as feelings. The smell of autumn leaves, the sound of a wooden gate swinging closed, laughter in the rain, not scenes, just pieces. The bridge seemed to hum quietly beneath them, not with noise, but with presence. It didn't offer answers, only space. Space for remembering or forgetting, whichever was needed. A single bird swooped low over the water, its reflection gliding just beneath it, nearly touching. The traveler watched it disappear between trees, then returned to stillness. The sound of the creek hadn't changed, moved with the patience of something that had never needed to be loud, a rhythm built by time, not urgency. They closed their eyes and listened to the quiet, each sound folding into the next until everything became one soft song. They felt the sun shift slightly, casting a new pattern of light across the bridge. Dust swirled in the air, golden and lazy. The vines near the railing swayed gently, their green leaves catching just enough wind to move, then pause. Everything seemed to breathe in and out, slowly, nothing forced. The traveler's shoulders relaxed, their hands rested in their lap. Still, the bridge held them not like a path, but like a cradle. The bench creaked again as they shifted slightly, but the sound felt natural part of the forest's quiet rhythm. A few ants traced a path across the wooden slats, moving with purpose too small to disturb the moment. The creek below whispered over smooth stones the same way it likely had for years. The traveler watched a single feather drift past on the current, spinning slowly. It reminded them of time, soft and ungraspable. Overhead, the trees leaned together like old friends, their branches filtering light into slow-moving shapes. It felt as though the world was pausing with them, not for them, just alongside. A pinnacle dropped somewhere in the distance, the only sudden sound in an otherwise unbroken hush. The traveler didn't startle. Instead, they let it blend into the calm, a moment of punctuation in the forest's long sentence. They reached into their pack and pulled out a worn notebook, the edges frayed from travel. The pages inside were mostly blank, scattered with bits of thought and fragments of poems. They didn't write anything, just held it in their lap. Not everything needed to be recorded. Some memories were meant to live only in the stillness where they were born. This place was one of them, too wide and quiet for words to fully hold. A dragonfly landed on the edge of the notebook, wings glinting in the light. It rested there for a moment, unmoving, as though it, too, was soaking in the peace. Then it lifted off without sound and vanished into the trees. The traveler watched it go, then leaned back again. Their spine met the curve of the bench, shoulders loose, eyelids heavy. The sunlight had warmed the wood. It felt like leaning into something kind. A slow yawn escaped without thought, and they let their head rest against the side of the bench. Not to sleep, exactly, but to drift. Their eyes closed part way, and the light flickered through their lashes. The sound of the creek filled their ears, steady, soft, always moving. And somewhere inside that sound was a feeling, safety. Like the bridge had seen many travelers before and had welcomed each one the same, quietly, fully. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of damp bark and wild mint. It drifted across the bridge, brushing the travelers' cheeks like a slow-moving tide. They breathed in deeply, letting the scent anchor them further into stillness. Time didn't seem to pass here. It drifted like the feather in the creek, like the sunlight through leaves. Everything was gentle, as if the world had padded its edges with moss and memory. They opened their eyes just enough to see the trees shimmering above, the sky now pale blue and quiet. The forest had no urgency, even the birds took their time. A few distant calls echoed softly, their echoes folding back into the hush. The traveler tilted their heads slightly and smiled without effort. Here, on this old wooden bridge, it felt like life had paused, not stopped, just stepped aside for a while to let the silence lead. In the stillness, they began to notice the details, the pattern in the wood grain, the way the vines curled as if listening, the faint ripples in the water below. Everything had its place. Nothing needed to be more than it was. The bridge didn't ask questions, and the creek didn't give answers. They simply existed, together, balanced. And in their quiet company, the traveler realized they, too, could simply exist. No roll, no rush. A ladybug crawled across their hand, red and slow, pausing at each wrinkle as though reading a map. They watched it carefully, not moving, feeling the tiny touch of its feet. When it flew away, the space it left behind somehow felt full, not empty. Like the memory of a soft voice or the warmth of a goodbye hug. Small things mattered here. Even silence had weight. Even stillness had shape. They shifted slightly and stretched their legs, muscles slow to respond but relaxed. No tension, remained just softness, like the way light slips into water. The bridge creaked again, not loud, more like a sigh. The traveler let their hand rest on the bench's arm, fingers trailing over smooth, weathered wood. They had nowhere to be, and for once that felt like enough. The creek flowed, the trees stood, the moment held. Sunlight shifted again, warming one side of their face, while a cool breeze kissed the other. The balance felt perfect, light and shadow, warmth and chill. Somewhere behind them, leaves rustled softly as if someone else were approaching, but no one came. The forest was simply turning over in its rest. The traveler closed their eyes again, not to sleep, but to drift, letting the rhythm of the creek carry them deeper into stillness. A single leaf floated down from the tallest branch, spiraling slowly, landing near their feet with barely a sound. It joined a small cluster of others, all gathered as if in quiet conversation. Nothing rushed to remove them. Here, even falling was graceful. The traveler watched it settle and let their gaze return to the water. The reflections shifted skytree, light all blending like paint on water, stirred gently but never spilling over. Their breathing deepened, each inhale long and soft, each exhale slower still. With every breath, it felt as though they were becoming less separate from the forest, less a visitor, more a part of the place. The trees didn't notice the difference. The creek didn't mind. The bridge beneath them remained steady, familiar, And in that quiet acceptance, the traveler found peace, not because they were doing anything, but because they weren't. They touched the railing beside them, fingers curling around a smooth, weather-worn knot. It felt like it had been held 1,000 times before, hands resting, bodies pausing, minds softening. It was comforting to think that stillness like this had happened here long before them, and would happen again long after. The bridge didn't remember names or faces. It only remembered the weight of quiet and the kindness of presence. A gentle creak came from somewhere deep in the wood, like a whispered thought. The traveler let their head rest back against the bench. Their eyes fluttered shut once more, not from exhaustion, but from peace. The kind of peace that seeps into the bones, slowly warming the body from the inside. The bridge, the creek, the trees, they all remained unchanged. But inside, something had softened, and that was more than enough. The longer they sat, the more the silence became a presence, not an absence. It wasn't empty, it was full of small sounds, small movements, small comforts. The creek murmured like an old friend telling a story with no beginning or end. The trees listened, the wind responded, and the traveler, they became part of that story. Not a visitor or an outsider, just another piece of the forest's calm, quietly fitting into place. They thought of nothing in particular, just sensations. The soft bend of sunlight on their knee, the way their breath matched the rhythm of the trees, the faint brush of a vine against their arm. There was no tension left to release, no edges left to smooth. The world around them had become round and slow. Everything curved, gently branches, stones, the path ahead, even time, which had once rushed, now circled like water in a pool. A squirrel scrambled up a nearby tree, then paused to peer down. Its eyes blinked once before it disappeared into the leaves. The traveler didn't move, just smiled faintly. Even the squirrel had a softness here, its energy dulled slightly by the mood of the place. Nothing disturbed the peace-knotty motion. Every sound and movement belonged, folded gently into the quiet tapestry the bridge and the creek had woven. The water below caught a single sunbeam and sent it shimmering across the underside of the bridge. Light danced gently, like fireflies under glass. The traveler watched it in silence, mesmerized by the delicate way it flickered, never the same, always familiar. Their thoughts moved like that light, slow and soft, never pressing forward, just circling, just being. It was the kind of stillness they hadn't known they needed. Another breeze came, brushing their cheeks and tugging softly at their sleeves. It carried the coolness of shaded water, the scent of green moss, the hush of deep woods. It felt like a whisper, stay, not forever, just a little longer, long enough for the heart to remember what it feels like to slow, long enough for silence to settle not only around them, but within. And so they stayed, listening, breathing, being. Somewhere upstream, a small splash echoed faintly a fish, perhaps, or a falling acorn. The sound was brief but soft, and it rippled through the moment like a pebble into still water. The traveler didn't look up. They didn't need to. In this place, surprise wasn't sharp. It was folded into the rhythm of calm. Everything was welcome, even the unexpected, especially the unexpected when it arrived this quietly. They pressed a palm flat against the bench's arm, feeling the grain of wood worn smooth by time. It was cool to the touch, steady beneath their hand. No varnish, no polish, just age and weather and quiet patience. It reminded them of something they couldn't quite name, like a voice from long ago, or a place they dreamed of as a child. The bridge held more than weighted held memory, even if it never told its stories out loud. A single golden leaf floated down beside them, catching the air in lazy spirals. It landed softly on the traveler's lap. They lifted it with both hands, studied its veins, its perfect imperfections, then let it go. It caught the breeze again and drifted away, like a thought no longer needed. Not everything must be kept. Some things, like moments or leaves, were meant to pass through gently, leaving only a trace of calm behind. The sky had deepened slightly, softening into early afternoon. Shadows leaned longer across the bridge, and the sunlight took on a warmer hue. The creek still flowed, unchanged, unbothered. The trees whispered above in their slow, leafy language. The traveler didn't feel the day slipping by. Time here wasn't a line, it was a pool, wide and quiet, holding the light and the silence together like water cupped in gentle hands. Their eyes closed again, this time without thought. It wasn't sleep. It was something between rest and wakefulness, soft floating, where breath was enough and the body no longer asked for anything. The bench supported them like an old friend. The bridge creaked once, gently, like it was sighing too. Around them the forests carried on, but within the traveler the stillness had rooted itself, slow and deep and true. A cloud passed overhead, casting a soft shadow over the bridge. The light dimmed briefly, wrapping the moment in gentle grey. It didn't feel gloomy, it felt like a lull in a lullaby, the quiet part between verses. The traveller opened their eyes slowly, as if waking from a thought instead of sleep. The world looked just as still, just as kind. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt more tender somehow. They stood slowly, stretching limbs that had grown heavy with rest. The wooden boards creaked beneath their weight, not complaining, just acknowledging. The creek below whispered its endless stream song. The traveller walked to the middle of the bridge again, resting both hands on the railing. The wood felt warmer now, sun-soaked and smooth. They looked down at the water and saw their reflection smiling back, soft and calm. In the rippling reflection, they noticed the trees, the light, the sky blended into one slow-moving picture. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful, like memories that aren't exact but still feel true. The traveller watched for a while, then looked up. The world was quiet. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of welcome. The bridge had offered them something rare, a space not to be anything but here, exactly as they were. A breeze caught their hair and carried it gently across their face. They didn't brush it away. It felt like a blessing, like the forest was running its fingers through time. The vines along the rail trembled slightly, leaves fluttering in slow waves. The sunlight returned as the cloud drifted on, brightening the bridge again. The moment glowed, not loudly, but with the soft certainty of something real, something remembered. They took one last look up the creek, where the water disappeared into bends and trees. There was no telling where it came from or where it was going. But here, on the bridge, the middle was enough. No origin, no destination, just this pause in between. The traveller closed their eyes and listened one more time. The creek, the birds, the wind, their own breath. Everything in harmony, everything exactly where it belonged. The traveler stepped back toward the bench and gathered their things slowly. The notebook slid gently into the bag, untouched but not unused. Sometimes presence was the only thing worth writing. The cup was emptied, the blanket folded. Nothing had been rushed into or out of this moment. Even in leaving, the forest moved in silence. The bridge had held space, and now it quietly let go. They lingered beside the railing once more, fingers grazing the wood. A silent thank you. No words, no ritual, just a pause, a breath, a kind goodbye. A bird sang again, high in the trees. Not a farewell, just a note in the background, as if the forest were continuing its song regardless. That was part of the magic. The bridge didn't ask to be remembered, but it would be gently and without trying. Crossing the bridge felt different now. Not heavier, not sad Jess, fuller. The boards beneath their feet felt familiar, as if they were being seen from the other side of something known. The bench grew smaller behind them, framed by vines and golden light. The traveler didn't turn around. The moment had been enough. The stillness, the creek, the hush-it would all live somewhere inside them now. Back on the path, the trees opened slightly, revealing a soft clearing brushed in morning light. The grass bent gently under the breeze, the trail curving beyond. There were no signs, no marks, just direction suggested by softness. The traveler followed it, not with purpose, but with trust. Whatever came next would arrive slowly, gently, just like the forest had offered all along. With each step, the bridge became memory. Not distant, but integrated, like a favorite melody that hums just beneath thought. Their shoulders were light. Their mind was quiet. The world ahead didn't feel like a place to reach, but a place to meet. And that made all the difference. The forest watched from above, tall and silent. The creek continued to flow beneath, a steady rhythm long after parting. The trail dipped slightly, then rose again. As the traveler walked, they caught glimpses of the water beside them, weaving through trees and rocks like a silver thread. The bridge was out of sight now, but its presence lingered. It had left something behind, not just peace, but permission. Permission to slow down, to listen, to stop and feel stillness without guilt. A gift the traveler hadn't known they'd needed. A patch of ferns swayed in the breeze, their delicate tips catching sunlight. The forest here was alive, but not loud. Even its energy felt hushed. The traveler touched one of the fronds gently as they passed. It curled slightly, as if returning the greeting. Small gestures meant more out here. A hand on a railing, a pause on a bench, a whisper of wind. Together they built a kind of language made entirely of calm. A squirrel darted across the path, then paused at the edge to look back. The traveler smiled. Every creature here seemed unbothered by their presence, not welcoming exactly, but accepting. The forest didn't resist them. It folded around them. They felt more like part of it now than a visitor within it. Each step they took didn't disturb the hush, it joined it, like walking through a memory that hadn't faded. The sound of the creek softened, replaced by birdsong and wind through leaves. The traveler kept walking, but slowly, each motion deliberate. They didn't want to rush back to the noise of the world. Not yet, maybe not for a while. What the bridge had offered wasn't just rest, it was reconnection to breath, to space, to the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for silence, only presence. The path curved gently again, and light filtered through the trees in ribbons. The traveler paused for a moment, standing in the glow. Their breath rose and fell like the forest's own rhythm. They were no longer searching. The bridge hadn't given them direction. It had given them grounding. A still point in the stream of everything else. And now, every step felt like it carried a little of that stillness forward. The forest opened slightly, revealing another quiet clearing where soft moss blanketed the ground. The traveler stopped again, not from fatigue, but from instinct. Stillness had become part of them, now a habit rather than a pause. They sat beneath a tree, back resting against its trunk. The bark was rough but grounding, like the bridge rail. Around them, the world held its breath, and they breathed in its quiet. Above, sunlight flickered between shifting branches. A few birds passed overhead, wings flapping with gentle rhythm. The air here was cooler, shaded by the thick canopy. The traveler closed their eyes and listened again. Every forest had its own voice. This one spoke in long silences and soft interruptions. They imagined the bridge, no empty, quiet, still. And yet, it felt like part of them had stayed there, resting. From the pocket of their pack, they pulled the notebook again and opened to a fresh page. This time, they wrote slowly. Just a few lines, more feeling than thought. Stillwater, warm bench, a breath that didn't rush. I belonged there. Then they closed the book, letting the words sit quietly between the pages. They weren't for reading later. They were simply a way to say, I was here, and it meant something. As they stood again, the moss beneath their boots pressed softly into the earth, leaving no trace. The forest, ever gentle, swallowed their presence like water taking back a stone. The path stretched on, but they no longer needed to know where it led. The stillness inside them was strong now, anchored by the hush of the creek and the weightless time spent on the bridge. Peace had taken root, slow and steady. They walked with a quiet rhythm now, footsteps matching the sway of trees overhead. A light mist began to drift between trunks, catching sunlight and casting pale halos across the forest floor. It felt like walking through a dream knot, one of fantasy, but of return, of remembering what it means to move without rushing, of hearing the world breathe, the kind of dream where waking up doesn't mean it ends. A rabbit darted across the trail ahead, paused, then disappeared into underbrush. The traveler paused too, allowing space for everything to continue as it wished. Nature didn't force moments. It offered them gently. That lesson the bridge had taught well. Every time they stopped now, it felt deliberate, not for rest, but for reverence. The trees ahead stood still, bathed in golden light, a living cathedral of calm. The wind rose again, just slightly. Leaves above rustled in quiet waves, as if brushing sleep from their branches. The sound wasn't loud, it was layered, soft, persistent, a lullaby of the forest. The traveler's eyes softened. Their body moved without thinking. The forest path wasn't something to conquer. It was something to walk with. And so they did, step after step, stillness within, silence all around. Their hand brushed a cluster of ferns, cool, damp, delicate. They paused to crouch beside them, tracing the tiny beads of dew still clinging to each frond. The drops sparkled like stars caught at ground level, each one holding a reflection of the world around it, so small yet complete. The traveler smiled, then stood again. These were the kinds of details they'd once missed, the kinds of things they now felt deeply. The path led to a fallen log stretched across a shallow stream. Instead of crossing quickly, the traveler sat down on the edge, letting their boots dangle just above the water. Sunlight caught on the stream's surface, playing across stones and sand. The water here moved more quickly than the creek before, but it still carried the same hush. Movement didn't have to mean noise. Energy didn't have to mean urgency. As they sat by the stream, they let one hand rest beside them, palm open. A single breeze passed, stirring their hair and brushing their fingertips with cool air. They inhaled deeply. The woods, the light, the rhythm of the stream, all of it flowed through them now. The bridge had been the beginning of this stillness, but it wasn't the only place it could live. It was a part of them now, carried forward, quietly, like breath. They rose slowly from the log, brushing their hands over worn bark. The trail beyond curved once more, half-shadowed beneath old oaks and pine. As they walked, their steps barely broke the hush. No birds startled, no leaves trembled. The forest had accepted them fully now. They were no longer a visitor, just another quiet thing moving through the trees, and that thought settled softly in their chest. The light through the branches turned warmer, the color of honey and memory. Ahead, a narrow ridge opened into a wide overlook. The traveler stepped out, letting the scene rise before them. Trees stretched in every direction, the creek a thin silver ribbon far below. And though they couldn't see the bridge from here, they felt it, not in sight, but in breath, as if the hush of it had followed them gently all the way here. They stood in silence, letting the view fill them slowly. No camera, no sketchbook, just eyes and stillness. The forest breathed all around, and they breathed with it. Every sound was soft, a bird's wings, a creak in the trees, their own quiet heartbeat. The bridge had done more than offer peace, had reminded them how to be still in a moving world. And in this wide moment, they finally understood. They sat on a moss-covered rock at the overlook's edge. The sky above had deepened into soft gold, and shadows stretched long across the land. The forest didn't say goodbye. It simply allowed parting to be as gentle as arriving. The traveler closed their eyes and placed a hand over their chest. The rhythm they felt was steady, calm, whole. They were still, they were present, and they were grateful. Reaching into their bag, they pulled the notebook out one last time. With slow hands, they opened to the next blank page and wrote one sentence. The stillness followed me home. Then they closed the book, placed it back inside, and rose. The trail continued beyond the overlook, winding into the trees once more. They stepped into it, not with urgency, but with ease, carrying the forest gently behind their ribs. Each footstep felt lighter now, the path soft beneath their boots. Crickets began to sing faintly, their voices weaving into the forest's quiet melody. Evening had begun to settle, not abruptly, but like mist across a meadow. They welcomed it. The end of a day didn't mean the stillness would fade. It lived in their pace now, in their breath, in the space between thoughts. A quiet they didn't have to seek anymore. They walked until the trees grew taller, the trail narrower. The wind was cooler here, brushing their cheeks with the first hint of night. Stars would come soon, scattered across the sky like leaves on water, but for now the forest remained bathed in amber, hushed and kind. They paused one more time, listening to the trees. The sound they heard wasn't the creak, it was the silence it had left behind. With each step they felt more grounded, not pulled by where they had been, or pushed toward where they were going. Just here, just now. The bridge had shown them how to slow down, and now the path welcomed them as if it had always known. There was peace in being unhurried. There was meaning in not needing to arrive. They smiled softly, feeling the hush like a second heartbeat. A clearing opened again, smaller this time, with a single fallen log at its center. They sat without thinking, letting their pack slide to the ground. They listened, not to the world, but to themselves. And in the quiet of that space, they found nothing missing. Stillness no longer felt like a pause. It felt like a homecoming, like remembering something the body had known all along. As the sky dimmed, stars blinked gently overhead. The forests settled into night, one breath at a time, and the traveler, now still again, rested in its quiet. The bridge was far behind, yet always near, not made of wood anymore, but of memory, peace, and presence. And as sleep brushed near, they knew they could return to it any time, not with footsteps, but with stillness and breath and the soft rhythm of being. The lantern grove. The path narrowed between two mossy stones, barely wider than a footstep. Trees arched above, their trunks close, branches tangled. The traveler moved slowly, brushing aside low ferns. The air was still here, like the forest was holding its breath. There was no sound, no birdsong, no breeze, only the faint crunch of leaves beneath their boots. It felt like the woods were watching, not with threat, but quiet invitation. They followed the path deeper, each step quieter than the last. Then, without warning, the forest opened. A clearing stretched out in soft dusk light, wide and silent. But what drew their breath was the glow. Dozens of lanterns hung from branches, swaying gently, though there was no wind. Their light was pale gold, like moonlight caught in glass. No flames burned, no wires showed, just light, just stillness. The lanterns hung at different heights, some just above the traveler's head, others high among the branches. Each one glowed steady and calm, casting soft pools of light on the mossy ground. No two looked alike. One was carved wood, another smooth stone. Some were simple, others etched with patterns. Yet they all gave the same warm glow. The grove felt untouched by time, or perhaps held outside of it. The traveler stepped into the clearing. Their boots made no sound on the moss. The light didn't flicker. Nothing stirred. And yet the place didn't feel empty. It felt full of memory, or maybe intention. As if the lanterns weren't just decoration, but guardians of peace. They walked slowly among them, hands at their sides, not daring to touch. This was a sacred quiet, one meant to be respected. They lowered themselves onto a smooth stone near the center of the grove. From there, they could see every lantern. Each one swayed gently, though the air was still. It was like watching thoughts move slow, luminous, unspoken. The traveler let their eyes soften. The glow began to feel like breath, like the inhale and exhale of the woods themselves. Calm began to settle around their shoulders like a soft shawl. The trees surrounding the grove stood tall and close, their trunks like columns in a vast green cathedral. High above, only small pockets of sky showed. A few stars blinked faintly, barely visible through the branches. But the grove didn't need starlight. The lanterns were enough. Their glow didn't fight the dark, it softened it, made it gentle. The traveler leaned back slightly and let their body rest. They hadn't planned to stop here. In truth, they hadn't even known this place existed. But now it felt as if the grove had been waiting not just for anyone, but for them. The way the light framed the trees, the silence that welcomed their breath, it all felt personal, like a song hummed just loud enough to hear, not for attention, but for presence. They closed their eyes for a moment. The world didn't disappear, it became still. A gentle warmth began to spread from the moss below, through their boots, up into their legs. Not heat exactly, just comfort, like settling under a blanket after a long day. The traveler let their fingers rest against the stone. It was smooth and cool, anchoring them to this moment. They breathed in through their nose, slowly, and let the air move through them like water. They had never felt quite this quiet before. A single lantern nearest to them swayed more than the others. Its light brightened slightly, pulsing once like a heartbeat. The traveler watched it calmly, curiosity softened by peace. The lantern dimmed again, steady and slow. It didn't want to be followed. It didn't ask to be understood. Like a thought that visits briefly, then leaves, it simply existed. The traveler accepted that, without reaching for more. The glow of the grove deepened as night folded in. The sky above faded to indigo, and the trees darkened to silhouettes. But the lanterns grew warmer, not dimmer. Their soft gold light now reflected in the traveler's eyes, steady and grounding. No fear lived in this dark, only rest, only breath. They pulled their coat tighter, not from cold, but from habit. Everything else was perfectly still, perfectly enough. Somewhere high above, an owl called once, low and distant. Its voice echoed gently through the trees, then faded. The grove remained unchanged. The lanterns didn't flicker. The light stayed even, calm. The traveler shifted slightly, the stone beneath them cool and steady. In the soft hush, their thoughts moved slower, not gone but softened, like words remembered just before sleep. One lantern in the far corner began to spin slightly, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Its light cast a slow spiral on the moss, stretching, then folding again. The traveler didn't move, only watched. It felt like a dream, not because it was strange, but because it felt real in a way the world often didn't. Everything here moved with purpose, yet nothing demanded attention. Stillness had become the language. The ground beneath them was thick with moss and leaves, soft as a bed. The traveler let themselves lie back, eyes tracing the golden lights above. They looked like stars, but closer, quieter. Some swayed in rhythm, others stayed completely still. The canopy above was so thick it felt like they were indoors, but the air was wild and free. The contrast was comforting, sheltered and open, silent yet alive. Their eyes fluttered closed. Behind their lids they still saw the lantern's impressions of light carried like afterglow. The moss cradled their shoulders. Their breaths slowed. The longer they stayed, the less they felt like they needed to move. The grove wasn't asking anything of them. No effort, no decision. Just presence. Just rest. The traveler let go of tension they didn't know they were holding. Memories drifted in slowly, like mist curling around tree trunks. A porch light flickering, a paper lantern at a summer fair, a candle beside a window in winter. Each memory soft, unfocused, warm. They came and went without urgency. The grove didn't invite nostalgia, it welcomed comfort. The kind that lives in small moments. The traveler let them pass, one by one, like leaves on a still stream. One lantern above began to dim, then slowly brighten again. Not a warning, not a signal, just a rhythm, like a heartbeat in wood and light. The traveler imagined each lantern had its own breath, its own gentle life. They imagined the grove was listening, not with ears, but with presence, a space that held them without question. The longer they lay there, the more they felt like the grove was breathing with them. Far off, a breeze stirred the outer branches. The sound of it moving through the trees was soft as a lullaby. Not enough to rustle the lanterns, but enough to remind the traveler that the forest was still alive. That life didn't always move quickly. That peace wasn't absence it, but presence without pressure. They smiled faintly, their lips barely moving. The body rested, the breath deepened. They imagined what the grove looked like to someone above an island of light in a sea of trees. Golden specks in perfect stillness, a secret map visible only in the hush of night. The lanterns didn't shine to guide anyone. They simply glowed. The traveler thought, not every light is meant to lead. Some are meant to remind of warmth, of quiet, of safe places within and without. Their hands rested over their chest, fingers lightly curled. They could feel their heartbeat slow, steady, untroubled. The lanterns had given it a new rhythm. Not faster, not slower, just calmer, like the way waves move when the tide is full. The traveler didn't want to sleep, but if they did, it wouldn't feel like slipping away. It would feel like being held, like the forest had made a bed from light and moss. They blinked once, slowly, and the lights above seemed to pulse in return. Not bright, just constant, like stars in a sky too close to be sky. The traveler whispered a thank you, though they didn't know to whom. Maybe the forest, maybe the silence, maybe the self they were only now remembering. The grove didn't respond. It didn't need to. The stillness said everything. The traveler shifted gently, letting one arm rest across their chest. Their breath rose and fell in perfect time with the rhythm of the grove. The lanterns above remained steady, glowing like distant memories. They no longer wondered how the lights floated or where the grove had come from. Some places weren't meant to be understandingly felt, and what they felt now was peace, full and without question. Time softened, melted. Minutes passed without form. The traveler wasn't sure how long they'd been there, but it didn't matter. The grove had no clock. The lanterns didn't count. Seconds they measured stillness. They marked moments by presence. And in this moment, lying quietly beneath a ceiling of soft gold, the traveler belonged to something older than ours. They belonged to calm. The trees swayed slightly, just enough for the branches to creak like a slow exhale. The sound wasn't eerie, it was grounding. It reminded the traveler that the world around them was living but resting. Even the forest knew how to sleep. The air carried the faint scent of cedar and earth, cool and steady. Every sense was cradled. Nothing was sharp. Everything had been sanded smooth by silence. They imagined stories told in this grove long before their time. Maybe others had found it to quiet souls wandering through noise until they reached this pool of hush. Maybe the lights had always been here, waiting, not as markers, but as mirrors, to reflect the stillness we forget we carry. The traveler let that thought go too, floating off like smoke. No need to hold anything, just breathe. A soft chime rang out from somewhere deep in the grove. It wasn't metallic, more like glass touched by air. One note, perfectly clear, then gone. The traveler didn't lift their head. The sound was enough. A reminder they were not alone, but also not required to respond. The lanterns had their own language. They didn't speak to demand. They glowed to reassure. You're here, you're safe. Their fingers brushed against the moss beside them, tracing the tiny threads of green that blanketed the earth. It was damp, but not cold-like, touching memory. They turned their palm downward, grounding themselves. The weight of their body was light now, as if the forest was holding them up a little. They let their eyes close again, not to fall asleep, but to listen deeper to the world beneath sound. Another lantern swayed, far to the right, sending a ripple of warm light across the nearby trees. The shadows danced in slow motion, like long, stretching limbs waking from rest. The traveler's breath matched that motion. Inhale with the sway, exhale with the stillness. It felt like being rocked not by hands, but by presence itself. The forest was not just a place, it was a feeling. A leaf drifted down from above, spiraling slowly through the air. It passed between two lanterns, catching their glow for a moment before landing silently near the traveler's foot. They didn't move to touch it. Its journey was complete. Even falling things moved gently here. There was no harsh landing, only arrival. That, they realized, was the gift of the grove. Everything arrived softly. They turned their heads slightly and watched a small line of mushrooms glowing faintly near a tree root. Their caps shimmered under the lantern light, barely pulsing with color. Even the smallest details here felt intentional, placed not for beauty alone, but for calm. The grove didn't overwhelm, it invited attention without asking for it. And that invitation was the most restful gift of all. The sky above had deepened into velvet, and stars now peeked through the canopy. Yet still the lanterns glowed. Their warmth hadn't changed. It was as if the night had joined them, not covered them. The traveler lay back again, eyes soft, mind quieter than it had been in years. In this grove of floating light and grounded breath, they knew they didn't need to go anywhere. Yet, maybe not at all. A low hum seemed to rise from the earth itself, not a sound exactly, but a feeling. Like the forest was exhaling through the roots, whispering something kind. The traveler's body responded without effort. Shoulders relaxed, jaw softened, limbs heavy with ease. The moss held them gently. The lanterns above swayed in rhythm. It was like being remembered by a place that had never forgotten them. Somewhere nearby, a small animal moved through the underbrush, tiny feet rustling leaves. The sound was faint and unthreatening, a part of the night's pattern. The traveler didn't look toward it. They let it pass. Here, every movement was welcome. Every sound was sottaged. Nothing broke the peace, because the peace wasn't fragile. It was deep, rooted, unshaken by life's quiet comings and goings. A memory surfaced, then walking through a field as a child, chasing fireflies, the warmth of dusk, the coolness of grass under bare feet, the wonder of lights that danced without reason. The grove felt like that wonder slowed and softened, a grown-up version of still magic. The traveler let the memory stay a while, not clinging to it, just allowing it to glow beside the lanterns, then fade again into calm. They shifted on the moss, not out of discomfort, but instinct. The body knows how to rest when it's safe. The stars above seemed brighter now, but the lanterns never dimmed. They were like steady friends always nearby, never overwhelming. There was no need to name the peace the traveler felt. It simply was, and that was enough. The world didn't need to be explained here, only felt, only breathed. A lantern beside them flickered once, gently. Its light pulsed and faded, then returned to its steady glow. The traveler watched without worry. Even in a place so calm, change still happened. But it was slow, thoughtful. The flicker didn't signal an end it, reminded them that even in stillness, things moved. The grove wasn't frozen. It was alive, quietly shifting, like breath in a deep, untroubled sleep. They imagined what it would be like to return here again, not with a goal, but with need. Not because they were lost, but because they wanted to remember how to be still. The grove didn't seem like the kind of place that could be found twice. But maybe, once you'd been here, it never really left. Maybe the glow of the lanterns stayed tucked somewhere inside, ready to guide you home in quiet moments. Their eyelids grew heavier, not from exhaustion, but from ease. The kind of heaviness that comes when you're allowed to let go. They didn't fight it. The grove didn't ask them to stay awake. The lanterns didn't demand attention. Everything here was permission to rest, to soften, to simply be. The traveler turned their head slightly, cheek resting against moss, and breathed in the earth's hush. Night had deepened fully now. The stars above were scattered and still. The grove didn't change with darkness. It held it, welcomed it. The lanterns glowed just the same, perhaps a little warmer now, as if they, too, settled into rest. The traveler didn't move. They were part of the grove, now just one more quiet thing in a place made entirely of quiet. And in that space, sleep waited kindly. A single breeze moved through the grove, passing from tree to tree, stirring lanterns in a slow, synchronized wave. The light rippled softly, golden and fluid. It passed over the traveler like a blessing, like a lullaby sung in silence. No words, just warmth. The moment passed, and the grove returned to stillness. But something inside the traveler had shifted just a little deeper into peace. They didn't know if they were asleep yet. The difference didn't matter. The line between dreaming and resting had blurred. They were simply here, held by moss, by light, by quiet. No story needed telling. No destination waited. Only this hush, this breath, this soft remembering of what it means to feel safe in stillness. And as the lanterns swayed above, the traveler drifted further into rest. The stars above blinked slowly through the canopy. They looked like distant lanterns, keeping watch from beyond the sky. The traveler, eyes barely open, watched one drift across the heavens. A shooting star, perhaps, or just a leaf catching starlight as it fell. It didn't matter. All motion here felt the same, gentle, without urgency. Even the sky moved softly in this place. Even the dark was kind. The forest wrapped itself closer, not with sound, but with presence. There was no fear of the night, only stillness. The lanterns, still glowing, had become part of the traveler's breath. Each inhale felt warmer, each exhale slower. They imagined the lights could feel them too, recognizing the hush within their heartbeat. There was no loneliness here, just quiet, shared between many unseen things. A soft vibration in the air stirred a memory, not a moment, but a feeling of peace, of sitting by a fireplace on a winter night, of being held without words. The grove offered that same comfort without touch. It needed no language, only light, only breath. The traveler let that warmth settle deeper, curling into the spaces between their ribs. Rest wasn't a goal anymore. It was simply the next part of being. They imagined the lanterns had names, not like people, but like songs, each one humming its own note, inaudible to ears, but felt in the bones. The traveler tried to match that rhythm. Their breath synced with the imagined song. Their chest rose and fell like a quiet tide. The forest sang in stillness, and they were part of the chorus. They had always been, they just hadn't heard it until now. The moss below held them like memory holds warmth. Not heavy, not tight, just enough to keep them grounded. A firefly blinked near their hand, its tiny light flickering once, then gone. For a moment they wondered if it had come from a lantern, or if the lantern had come from it. Light, here, seemed to flow freely between trees, through thoughts, across dreams. It was all one gentle thing. A lantern above gave a low, slow creak. Not sharp, not broken, just old, like a rocking chair sighing. The traveler felt the sound vibrate through their spine, a lullaby made of wood and air. Every piece of the grove worked together to soothe. Nothing was out of place. Not the creaks, not the breeze, not the stillness inside. It all fit perfectly into the quiet pattern of rest. They imagined roots below, the moss-deep, tangled, ancient, holding up the grove from beneath, like a net of time catching every tired soul that passed through. The traveler felt those roots now like threads under skin, steady, present. They weren't alone here. The forest held them not as something to protect, but something to honor. And in that knowing, they softened even more. Their fingers curled loosely in the moss. Sleep pressed close, soft and patient. No urgency, no pull, just an offering. A place to drift without direction. The lanterns began to blur slightly in their vision, not from change, but from peace. Everything had slowed to a hum. Time, breath, thought. The traveler didn't need to close their eyes now. They were already halfway to dreaming. One lantern dimmed briefly, then returned to its glow. The traveler watched without concern. Even the light rested here in its own way. Everything had permission to pause, even the traveler's thoughts. No planning, no remembering, just breath and warmth, and the glow of something ancient and kind. The grove didn't promise anything. It simply offered what was needed, a place to let go. The stars above shimmered, the forest stilled, the lanterns glowed like soft memories. The traveler felt nothing pulling them forward and nothing pushing them back. They were suspended in now, held by moss and light and hush. Sleep finally arrived not as a fall, but as a gentle fade. The grove didn't cheer or weep. It just kept glowing, as it always had for every traveler ready to rest. The forest had become part of them now, not the trees or moss or lanterns alone, but the rhythm of the quiet, the patience, the still breath of night. The traveler didn't stir. Their body was light, their thoughts distant. They floated just below waking, cradled by something older than time. The grove didn't hold them tightly. It simply stayed near, like a presence too gentle to name. A lantern above flickered once more, this time slower, like a wave goodbye. It wasn't a farewell, only a recognition. The traveler had found rest. The grove would remember. It always did. Out. Through memory as people know it, but through silence. Every stilled breath taken here added to the quiet. And the traveler's breath now moved with it soft, deep, and perfectly at peace. The wind had faded completely. Even the trees stood motionless, wrapped in the hush of midnight. Stars blinked behind branches, their light distant and warm. The lanterns never outshone them, they danced alongside. A closer constellation. The traveler lay in the center of that galaxy of stillness, their body barely rising and falling with breath. No dreams disturbed them, just calm. A soft chime rang again, distant and low. It drifted between trunks and lanterns, settling like mist. It was a reminder, not a request. The traveler didn't open their eyes. The sound folded gently into the quiet, like a note that completes a lullaby. No beginning, no ending, just continuation. The grove asked for nothing, gave everything. The light, the breath, the hush, it was all still here. They dreamed now, though it felt more like remembering. Trees lit from within, moss that hummed, a grove hidden by silence but found by need. Their dream moved slowly, without urgency. Shapes softened, time slipped. Even in sleep, the forest offered peace. The lanterns floated through their thoughts like fireflies in slow motion, brushing sleep with gold. Elsewhere, far beyond the trees, the world moved fast, strushing, spinning, buzzing. But here, in the lantern grove, that motion didn't matter. The traveler had stepped out of time, not for ever, just long enough to be reminded that rest is sacred, that silence heals, that breath can be enough. And even when they left, they would carry this hush inside them. A soft rustle passed through the moss as a small animal padded across the clearing. It paused near the traveler, sniffed the air, and moved on. No fear, no hurry. The lanterns glowed on. The forest watched, not to judge, but to witness, to hold space. This was a place where nothing needed fixing, where being was the only thing asked, and the traveler had given in fully to that invitation. The sky was deep blue now, nearly black, with stars pulled tight above the trees. The grove looked like a dream someone might try to remember upon waking, but it wasn't a dream. It was real in the way that sleep is real, in the way breath is real, in the way peace feels in the bones. The traveler didn't stir. They were part of the stillness now, wrapped in gold and quiet. The final lantern nearest the traveler dipped slightly, as if nodding in approval. The grove didn't change, didn't darken, didn't end. It simply continued being exactly what it was, a soft, glowing place for quiet soul. The traveler would wake eventually, but not now. Not soon. The grove would give them all the time they needed. That was its only promise. And so the grove glowed on. Lanterns swaying gently, moss holding still, stars watching from above. The traveler slept, their breath slow and even. No words remained, no thoughts intruded. Just the hush, just the glow. Just the quiet rhythm of a forest remembering how to hold a soul at rest. The bell beneath Fern Hill. The Travier opened their eyes again, but didn't move. The clouds above had thickened, casting the grove in deep, soft grey. Shadows shifted, but didn't sharpen. The entire hill felt like a breath held between thoughts. They looked up at the beam where the bell would be, still empty. Yet in their chest, they swore they could feel its weighted silence, its waiting, its gentle, unspoken purpose. They stood slowly, brushing moss from their coat. The shrine's wood was smooth, worn by time and softened by rain. They reached up without thinking, fingers grazing the beam. It was cool and solid. No rope, no clapper, but still something thrummed through it, like the memory of music. Their fingers paused, then rested. They felt not sound, but permission to be quiet, to be still, to be present. They stepped outside the shrine, barefoot now, boots resting beside the roots. The ferns felt cool against their feet, like walking through a dream. The entire hill breathed with them. Each inhale deepened the calm. Each exhale released a little more weight. They weren't waiting for the bell to ring again. They understood now. It hadn't rung from wood or rope, it had rung from within. Down the hill, the forest stretched endlessly, trees wrapped in mist. It wasn't far, yet it felt distant, like another world, humming with thoughts and noise. Up here, only breath remained, only softness. The travelers sat again, folding into the moss. Their spine touched the tree once more, and they felt it a vibration almost imagined. The bell had never been heard with ears, only with stillness. They closed their eyes again. The air moved like water, slow and cool across their cheeks. It didn't disturb, it caressed. From deep below, they imagined the earth humming. A slow, low tone beneath thought. Perhaps the bell was never meant to hang above. Perhaps it had always rung from under the hill, in the roots, in the stone. A sound only the heart could hear when all else had grown quiet. Thoughts drifted in, but none stayed. They floated through like dandelion seeds, touching down, then rising again. The traveler didn't chase or resist them. Letting go had become natural here. It was easier than holding on. The hill asked nothing. The bell gave nothing but peace. And the stillness wasn't cold. It was full, like the hush before a soft snowfall or the last light of dusk. They began to imagine other travelers, long before them, sitting in the same spot, hearing the same silent tone. Each one called by the bell when they needed rest. Maybe no one ever came twice. Maybe you only needed to find it once, to carry its echo home. They liked that thought-a-quiet fraternity of souls, linked by a sound not heard but known, a song that only peace can sing. Above, the clouds parted briefly, letting in a pale shaft of light. It passed through the branches, catching in the beams of the shrine. The moss seemed to glow a shade brighter. The bell didn't ring. It didn't need to. Its message had already landed. Rest here, be here, let go of the noise. The traveler smiled softly, lips barely parting. Their chest rose, slow and deep, filled with quiet. They ran their hand across the moss beside them, each tiny leaf soft and cool. Time didn't move here, or if it did, it moved like mist. There was no rush to leave, no sense of ending, only pause, a sacred in-between. The traveler let themselves lay down again, head resting just beside the shrine. Overhead, the leaves danced slowly, catching what little light still passed through the sky. Sleep came gently, like the final note of a lullaby. Not sudden, not sharp, just a deepening of calm. The bell didn't ring again, not out loud, but its tone remained, carried in the rhythm of their breath, in the stillness of the hill. And as they drifted further inward, the forest below faded, and only one sound stayed with them. The memory of a bell, soft and steady, that only the heart could hear. The sun dipped lower, though no light was lost. The grove remained softly lit, as if the hill glowed from within. The traveller lay still, not asleep, not fully awake, a place between, the kind of rest that renews quietly, without noise or dreams, the kind that asks nothing. The bell, even in silence, was everywhere, in the moss, in the still air, in the slow rhythm of their breath. They imagined the hill's roots spreading far below, winding through stone and soil, holding echoes of every traveller who had come before, a memory of stillness stored beneath the surface. Their own breath had joined that quiet song now, deepening the music no one else could hear. They didn't feel alone. They felt part of something vast and tender. The hill didn't speak, it simply stayed. Time softened further. The world below, the hill blurred behind layers of fern and fog. Even the thoughts they carried when they arrived had quieted to still shapes. The traveller felt no need to rise, no urge to explain or continue. The bell hadn't asked a question. It had offered a gift. And here, wrapped in moss and hush, they accepted it fully. Not by doing only, by being. A distant bird sang a single note, high and short. It echoed gently through the trees, then was gone. It didn't break the silence, it folded into it like a breath. The traveller listened, not with attention, but with presence. The forest was not asleep. It was resting like them, a living pause. The ferns swayed once, as if in agreement, and then the stillness returned, deeper than before. They opened their eyes and saw the shrine from below. It stood unchanged, empty yet complete. Its open frame let the sky pass through, and for a moment it looked like the wind itself might hang there. A beller's tower for a bell that didn't need to be seen. The traveller smiled again, more within than without. The bell had never truly rung. It had only listened down, invited them to do the same. The sun lowered, casting a golden hue across the tops of the ferns. The light shimmered like water. The air had cooled, but the traveller remained warm. The moss beneath held heat like memory, and the stillness around them was enough to soften every edge. The world did not feel far. It simply felt quieter. The sound of the bell no longer mattered, only what it had made possible. A soft breeze returned, curling through the shrine, brushing their cheek like a hand made of sky. It stirred nothing urgent, just a reminder of movement. The traveler listened, not to the breeze, but to their response to it, how their chests lifted and fell, how their hearts slowed further. The hill didn't ask for stillness, it created it. The bell was not a call, it was a return. They sat up slowly, without resistance. The world spun softly, as if careful not to disturb the balance of the grove. They looked out across the trees again, now layered in dusk. Everything was where it had been. Nothing had changed, but they had, not in any loud or visible way, but deep within, something had settled. Something long, restless, had finally found its breath. Their hand touched the shrine one last timeward, warm with the memory of sun. They didn't speak. No part of this place required words. The bell had said everything it needed to in silence. The traveler stepped through the ferns, slowly descending the hill. Each step carried the softness of stillness. No hurry, no plan, only peace moving through motion. The forest opened to receive them. At the base of the hill, they paused and turned back. The shrine stood silhouetted against the sky, small and quiet. The ferns swayed gently, golden in the low light. The bell hadn't rung again. It didn't need to. The traveler would carry its tone now, in sound but in stillness. A hush they could return to any time, not by climbing, but by remembering what it felt like to listen without expecting. They walked slowly now, the forest path greeting them like an old friend. Branches above framed the evening sky, painted with soft hues of blue and silver. The sounds of the woods returned, distant rustles, a bird's quiet song, the breath of wind through pine. But none of it disturbed the stillness. It walked with them, wrapped around their shoulders like a shawl woven from silence. The traveler felt no need to hurry. Time here moved gently, like the leaves that drifted down ahead of them. They stepped over roots and through shadowed glades, their breath matching the rhythm of the trees. The bell's call had faded, but its peace remained, anchored in the quietest parts of them. Each step forward was a return, not a departure. They remembered how the bell had sounded soft, low, just once. But now they wondered if it had ever truly made a sound at all. Maybe it had only opened something within, a doorway to stillness, a place to rest that had always been there, waiting to be remembered, not above or below, but inside. The thought comforted them more than any answer ever could. As the last light faded through the trees, the traveler paused at a bend in the trail. Behind them, the hill stood hidden, just another rise in a sea of green. No sign marked the place, no path pointed the way, and yet they knew it would always be there. For others, for the weary, for anyone who needed silence more than sound. The bell would wait. It always did. The ferns grew thinner now, replaced by tall grasses and low brush. Night had nearly arrived. The stars blinked softly overhead. The traveler breathed in the scent of pine and damp leaves. The earth was settling, preparing for rest, and so were they. No destination pressed them forward. No thought pulled them back. Only the moment remained quiet, whole, and slow. In their chest, a gentle warmth pulsed. Not excitement, not sorrow, just peace. The kind that takes root deep in the bones. The bell had not been magic. It had simply reminded them of what was already there. A still place, a quiet truth, a softness that didn't need to be earned, only remembered. That was the gift the forest had given them. That was the tone the bell had sung. They reached a clearing surrounded by tall pines. Above, the moon had risen, casting silver over the forest floor. The traveler sat one last time, resting on a smooth rock warmed by the day. They didn't think of where they'd go next. That could wait. Now was for stillness, for breath, for the final hush before sleep. The forest leaned in close, and the silence wrapped around them. A breeze passed through the trees, soft as a sigh. The pine needles whispered to each other, and the stars listened in silence. The traveler closed their eyes. Their breath moved slow, deep, and even. The bell, wherever it lived, echoed now in their rhythm, not as a sound, but as stillness. A hush tucked between heartbeats, calling no one and welcoming all. The forest grew darker, but not cold. It was the kind of dark that held you gently, like the end of a lullaby. The traveler felt the earth beneath them, firm and kind. The sounds of the world softened until all that remained was the rise and fall of breath. They were no longer seeking anything. They had found the silence that waits beyond noise, and it had found them in return. And so the traveler rested, beneath stars, beside trees, within the still hum of a bell that never rang. The forest kept its watch, and the night unfolded slowly. There were no endings here, only hush, only breath, only peace held lightly in a grove of green. And as sleep finally took them, the bell whispered one last time, not out loud, but from within, "You are home."